Well, Visa and Mastercard continue to face challenges over interchange. Latest news is out of the UK Competition Appeal Tribunal,
Mm,
which is a rule that the two companies' multilateral interchange fees infringe on competition law.
mm. No shocker there. I mean, that's like
Right? Yeah.
it's like you
But
think.
but the tribunal is a UK specialist judicial body that decides cases involving competition and economic regulatory issues.
Sure.
And this, of course, is the latest round in a long-running saga involving lawsuits brought by hundreds of merchants. Visa, MasterCard, of course, couldn't be expected to appeal the decision.
Right.
Here in the U.S., meanwhile, U.S. Lawmakers failed in their attempt to attach the Credit Card Competition Act to the Genius Act, which is
Hmm.
the stablecoin regulation
Right.
act.
Right.
But of course, the word in Washington is that the debate over regulation of credit card fees is not over. It's not even close to being over.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's just, yeah, they'll find some other way. They'll find something. They always
Yeah.
do. But
I
you
hope
got
it's I do hope the Credit Card Competition Act will not become law, but yeah, I'm hoping that the debate will maybe go in a more reasonable direction.
that,
So,
well, and that's exactly what I
uh,
think. And I think we've discussed this before. I think the industry really needs to be lobbying on this and lobbying hard,
yeah.
because, it's untenable. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about ripping down a system and starting all over again, you
Right.
know?
Right. Mm,
I mean, I can't imagine being, for example, a Chase and having to reissue every single card,
right.
right? I mean,
Yeah, it's an insane idea. So, well, and again, it's one of those things too. It's so impractical that if it did pass, it would take, 10 years of court battles and everything else to be implemented, just like the Durbin, as far as
right,
the,
just like Durbin,
the
exactly.
as far as the debit routing. Now, again, the interchange cap, I mean, that happened like very, very quickly, but the debit routing stuff is really still open for discussion in a lot of ways.
I don't think the
So,
debit routing stuff's going to go. Personally, I don't think it's going to go through,
yeah.
especially because we're going to have a change. Bauman, one of the Fed governors, was
Mhm.
elevated to vice chairman, and she is anti-debit. She was the only dissenting vote on the Federal Reserve Board, and she's now vice chairman of the
Oh,
board.
wow.
So
Yeah. Yeah. For
I,
those who maybe, for those who maybe don't know, this argument is about, there's again, a kind of an unfair competition type, debate about Visa and MasterCard are making sure that all of the debit transactions are going over their networks, their debit networks. And the idea is that they should be forced to kind of allow more choice in debit routing. I think, did I say that right, Patty? Is that?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, but and the choice being that either like using Amex, Discover, or more logically one of the regional ATM
Like a
networks.
Shazam or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, it's interesting to note that, Pulse,
Mhm.
the ATM network out of Texas, is owned by Discover, which is now owned by um,
Capital One.
Capital One. Right, Capital
Right.
One.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
would be that throws an interesting wrench into the works, I
It
think,
does. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So
okay. How
so
many stories?
next
How many we got today, Patty? I think you said we have three,
we
right?
have four.
Four
Yeah,
today.
we have
Okay.
four.
All right.
But
What's the next one?
this is the long one. This is really sort of a recap,
Okay.
because it's been a busy news cycle for stablecoins.
Oh my.
You know,
Yes.
it's as though the U.S. Senate approving the Genius Act kind of blew the lid off of things.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, of course, the U.S. House has its own ideas about how to regulate stablecoins, so there's going to need to be some haggling, and it's going to take time. But still,
Right.
meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Amazon, Walmart, and other multinational giants are exploring whether to issue their own stablecoins, bypassing traditional payment systems and costs like interchange.
Right.
Um,
Which
the
which
March,
by which by the way doesn't necessarily. This is something I think our audience a lot of times doesn't quite get. So to be clear, they're not necessarily saying they're bypassing Visa, Mastercard, or Discover like rails. That's not where
right,
interchange exists. That, when you think about it from a cost perspective, right? On the average US transaction right now, 1.8% would be interchange cost, and then
right,
0.2% or 20 basis points would be the card brand cost. So in other words, you could, let's say Walmart and Amazon wanted to get together, which is this rumor going around. If they wanted to get together and do their own stable coin, they can make that a Visa stablecoin or a MasterCard stablecoin, meaning that they would have access to the entire rails and the network of those
Right.
card brands, but there would be no interchange cost because they would be in a weird way, they would be kind of like the issuing bank in this case. They would be the ones issuing the stablecoin. So it
Right.
is something, and
Right.
and again, think about that from Walmart's perspective and go, okay, Walmart and Amazon together, how much do they spend in interchange a year? I mean, billions and I can't even imagine. Like so,
I can't even
so
imagine. Yeah.
it's easy to see how that could be an idea that they would be really excited about and pursuing. So,
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. And they're already doing, things like that. For example, Stripe has just announced that it's working with Shopify and Coinbase, which is one of the
hmm
crypto wallets, to enable merchants on the Shopify e-commerce platform to accept stablecoin payments, specifically US dollar coin. Um, they can use their preferred crypto wallets, and by default, Stripe will allow merchants to receive stablecoin payments in their preferred local currency, or they have the option of transferring funds to a USDC directly into a digital wallet. US dollar coin is USDC.
right.
Now, Visa too is working with Stripe,
hmm
as well as Bridge, which is the stablecoin platform that's owned by Stripe. That arrangement, which is very interesting, enables fintech developers using Bridge to offer stablecoin linked Visa cards to end customers through a single API integration. Cardholders thus would be able to make purchases from a stablecoin balance at any merchant location that accepts Visa.
hmm
Now the focus is on Central and South America with availability spreading to Europe, Africa, and Asia in coming months. That according to a Visa statement. But no doubt, U.S. availability will be in the cards once a regulatory framework like the Genius
hmm
Act is erected.
Yeah.
Now, not to be left out, Mastercard is working with Fiserv, which we reported last week, has its own stablecoin, FIUSD, and it wants to weave that stablecoin into its range of payment products for use by customers.
Right.
And just to kind of wrap up this whole stablecoin discussion, I was watching the other day a interview on CNBC.
hmm
They always have very interesting. If you don't you watch those, online, you really should do that because there are really a lot of movers and shakers. But anyway, this was with Zach Abrams, who was the co-founder of Bridge.
mm
And he described stablecoins as, quote, an entirely new money movement platform, not unlike credit cards were in the second half of the 20th century.
hmm
Stablecoins currently have a market cap of about $400 billion,
hmm
but Abrams and other things I've read suggest that number could reach $2 trillion within a few years.
Yeah. Well, and Patty, the thing about stable coins that I'm so intrigued by is that stable coins, in my opinion, still do not solve any core kind of fundamental problems for consumers, right?
No,
Right. But
it does for the banks.
but this is what it. Well, yes, and it could put the banks in a really bad spot, right? So
Right,
there's, in my opinion, the thing that it does is that it basically is, how do I put this? Stablecoin in a lot of ways to me is like the deregulated debit situation that we see where you have companies like Chime and even like Nativia, our sponsor, right? When they're doing this
right,
banking, well, how are they doing a lot of this? Well, what's happening is they're doing all this innovation because they want to capture the interchange,
right.
right? And our industry has been so focused on acquiring that we don't really understand issuing very well
I
as a
know, I
group.
agree. I agree.
And I think that that's a big weakness right now. If you're an agent, like go to ChatGPT and be like, load in some of these news stories about stablecoin and say, help me understand how does this, how would interchange work? How and really start to understand, because what could happen here is this could just be a platform that allows more fintechs to innovate around payment processing
Right,
because they now have this huge revenue driver to play with. So they
Right.
can say, well, we don't have 1.8% interchange. That's ridiculous. We only have 50 basis points, right?
Right.
And it's
Right.
like, well, that's a big deal because now you're going to drive adoption, especially if, again, if you can run it over traditional rails like Visa or MasterCard. It's not that there's a big benefit to the consumer necessarily on its on the face of it,
No,
but it's
no.
like there's no reason for them not to use it either. It's not like it's less convenient. It's a credit card. It's just
It's
that,
just another option.
yeah, it's like, but behind the scenes, it's running over the stablecoin infrastructure with crypto so that you cut out this kind of middleman of the issuing bank. So
Right.
by doing that, it's very interesting because now it's like, well, not like any company because there'll be regulations, but like kind of any reasonably sized company, any well-funded company. Well, now all of a sudden they could roll out their card and it could be a stablecoin card. You look at, I'll tell you one market, Patty, that I think is going to explode with this is think about all of the stores that have these cards. You think about what's the name of I can't remember the name of the company now. There's one company that's really good at this where they help, Southwest launch their card and they help,
Right.
Kroger's, right? Like everybody has their own like card, right? Well, when they did those cards and they released those cards, they're actually not and again, I'm not the expert on this, but my understanding is they still have an issuing bank in that scenario and so they're not
Yes.
collecting all the interchange. Well, but there's a big brand value of like they're pushing their card, right? And there's like
Right.
in-store credits. Well, there's somebody's going to start a competing version of that on stablecoin type payments.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's going to take off like lightning because these businesses are going to say, well, I want to have my own card. Look at Southwest is a great example of that, right?
Right.
I will be shocked if 12 months from now, the Southwest card that I have in my wallet is not a stablecoin card because
Oh yeah, I would be too.
Southwest, they're gonna say, wait a minute. We can have the Southwest card and it won't cost like we don't have to cover, we get to
Right.
keep whatever this is. Like, oh my word. I mean, that's unbelievable. And they can charge 100 basis points or whatever. They can go less, but they can still make all the money. So there's a huge financial motivator to the big players to
Right.
use this new framework, not because it's necessarily better for consumers, but because there's a huge cost advantage, and that cost advantage could drive adoption very, very quickly.
And I'll just put in a plug for myself here. I've been doing like a four-part series in the Green Sheet on stable coins and crypto,
Oh,
which
really?
kind
I
of,
haven't even
yeah,
read that yet. I'm gonna read that. Okay.
yeah, check it out. I'm working on the fourth part right now as we speak. So
Okay.
that's where some of this stuff is coming from because I've been
Right.
really doing a deep dive and
Sure.
having, and it really it is more of an issuing thing, but it's something that our people need to understand,
Oh, absolutely.
you
Because
know?
our merchants have to be able to accept these payments, which
Right.
again, to clarify, I don't really see that being a big issue. I could be wrong about that, but I see this flowing over Visa, MasterCard, Discover, traditional rails. Maybe like PayPal is going to
Right.
become a bigger thing potentially, but
Right.
from an acquiring perspective, I don't necessarily see that as a bigger issue, but it is going to have an impact on things like our pricing because how do
Hmm.
we price merchant? Remember it used to be that there was always this, a tiered pricing. There used to always be the credit and then there was the debit
Right.
rates. You used to pay, flat rate. It was like 2.9% for credit and it was like 1.5% for debit or something like that.
Right.
Because the debit cost was so much less. Well, now it's like, what do you do with the, for the crypto cards? And it's like, well, for stablecoin cards, maybe that number is going to be 50 basis points and so that's going to have a big impact on cost. It's going to impact things like differential pricing.
Right.
What's the regulation on that? Can you surcharge these cards? Is it, you know what I mean? There's a lot
And that's
of,
going to be a big thing,
yeah,
the
there's a lot of
surcharging.
downstream, yeah, a lot of
Hmm.
downstream stuff. And I actually, and again, everybody knows I'm the biggest crypto critic that exists. I think, as far not, but
You and I together, but this is one of the
right,
things where you and I really agree.
right,
Because people
right.
I've been interviewing for this, I've been kind of like challenging them, like, come
Right.
on,
Like, what's
this
the
is,
point? Right.
yeah,
Right. But
right.
again, stablecoin, I am like all in on that
Yeah,
because again, one of two things has to exist. If you want something to take off, right? You either have to have, from an acquiring issuing perspective, from a payments perspective, it's a
right,
network effect. There either has to be a good reason for a merchant to accept it, like a very compelling reason, or there has to be a really compelling reason for a consumer to use it.
right.
Now, Bitcoin currently has neither of those things, in my opinion. I know I'm maybe the
I'm
outlier, but
with you. I'm
it
with you
is
on that.
neither of these things. Now, I'm not saying it's not long-term viable. Don't get me wrong. If I want to go buy a yacht for $12 million or $30 million,
Oh yeah, sure, use some Bitcoin
I'm
and
going to
do
use
it.
Bitcoin for that. And I want to go in another country or whatever. I want to buy a Ferrari from somewhere. So I get that, but as far as mainstream America, there's no driver. Stablecoin, again, no driver for the consumer. But
But
if the business is going to be able to dramatically reduce cost, or the fintech innovators that are making the new cards and the new consumer programs, if there's a huge benefit to them from a cost perspective, that is enough of an economic driver to make things move. How fast?
yeah,
I don't know, but it's going to make things move.
yeah, I agree with you 100% there, and it'll be really. I think it's going to be, you know, fast. I think we're talking about within a year or two, we're going to really
Yeah,
see.
this is going to matter. Yeah, this is going
Yeah,
to, I think 12 months from now, this is going to matter,
yeah,
to our, to our, to
agreed.
our industry, right?
Yeah.
It's going to trickle down to our industry. So, all right, real quick,
Okay.
we got to do these last two. You said you
Yep.
have two more, right?
Two more. They're very quick. New report from Business Research Company. The market for payment processing solutions is what they were studying. They say it will grow from $121.28 billion in 2024 to $141.1 billion this year, which is roughly a 9%
Wow.
combined annual growth rate.
Yeah.
By 2029, the market will reach $268.7 billion with a
Mm,
compound annual growth rate of about 17.5%. The key contributors are going to be contactless payments, the incorporation of blockchain, embedded payments, and wider use of mobile wallets.
mm.
So
Makes
that
total sense.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
Just
it is.
and speaking of mobile wallets, consumers are really taking to mobile wallets for in-store purchases. A key finding from Payments Intelligence, that's PYMNTS,
Hmm.
the online newsletter. They did a survey of, this is a monster survey, 216,000 consumers in 11
Wow.
countries. So
Okay.
this is
Yeah.
really telling you
Big
something.
data. Yeah.
Yeah. And the key data points are 21% of all in-store transactions were completed using a mobile wallet last year.
Mm.
That's a 10.9% increase over 2022.
Wow. Yeah.
So, I mean, if that
Yep.
keeps going on, if that
Yep.
keeps,
Sure.
it's going to be
And I mean, I
substantial.
see that. I said even in my own use. I mean, I really just use Apple Pay whenever I can, and it drives me absolutely crazy when I go to Walmart. Like, I don't even want to. It like drives me nuts because they won't take Apple Pay or Google Wallet. They have their own payment through their app or whatever. And they're like, every
Right,
time I'm always like, why don't you guys do it? And they're like, oh, just download our app. And I'm like, I don't want to download your app. I already have. Anyway,
right.
but
I
I'm
know.
sure they'll roll out their stable coin and then it'll all be fine. So, so
But yeah, it's funny because I'm not a big mobile wallet person, but it's a generational thing.
yes,
I
yes,
go out with friends that are younger than me, and they're just, to them it's just natural.
right,
Pull out the phone, hit and
right.
do
Yep.
the thing. I mean, I have trouble even doing when there's news stories or stuff. Scan the QR code on the screen. I have
Right,
trouble
right.
doing that.
That's
So
funny. Well, we'll have to keep following that, but I think that definitely is a big trend for sure. So
yeah, for sure. So that's it for this week, folks.
awesome. Well, Patty, thank you so much for all your research you do on this. And everybody definitely head over to, I always forget, is it greensheet.com or
No,
thegreensheet.com?
greensheet.com.
So just greensheet.com. Head over there. Check out the story Patty's working on, 4-part series on stablecoin. You need to read that. You need to be in the know on that one. So,
Yeah, yeah. I start off with just like basic explaining what it is and the
yep.
definitions and so forth, and then I go into uses and applications. I think you can learn a lot from it. So
Yeah.
please,
Good stuff. All right,
okay,
Patty. Thanks so much.
take care.